Hello, everyone. I'm, here today with Kay Van Wey, a medical malpractice attorney and just amazing woman overall with Van Wey and Metzler law firm, and the host of AdvoKAYte, Holding Healthcare Accountable. We're here. What's in the news right now? Lindsay Clancy. That case has been everywhere, but it's more focused. A lot of the news is more focused on the criminal trial, and there's medical and a legal story that's kind of underneath this. So before we get into all the legal stuff, as two moms here, this one hits just a little bit different. But that's exactly what we need to talk about. So I want you to kind of take a moment and acknowledge the case at its core.
Well, thanks, Kaylee, for asking me to talk about this. And it is fascinating from a legal perspective, but you're a mother, I'm a mother. A lot of the people listening now are mothers, and it's absolutely horrifying and heartbreaking. And I know a lot of people, my friends, my own mother suffered from severe postpartum depression, and it's a horrific thing for anyone to face. Even without such a tragic outcome. But yeah, so everybody's focused on the criminal case, which in and of itself is fascinating, but there's also a civil case pending, and that has a lot of interesting legal twists and turns to it.
Can you kind of dive into that a little bit more? Like what is the difference there?
Well, in a criminal case, because someone's life or liberty is at stake, it's a much higher burden of proof. The jury must find beyond a reasonable doubt. Some would say without a shadow of a doubt. In a civil case, it's a preponderance of the evidence, meaning, is this set of facts more likely than not in favor of the plaintiff or the defendant? But the legal theories are also completely different. The civil case at its core is a medical malpractice case. So the father and husband brought a civil lawsuit against various of the psychiatrists and various other clinicians on behalf of himself and the three children. And it's a wrongful death medical malpractice case. Essentially, what is being alleged is that the clinicians, and primarily the psychiatrist, as I understand it, did not make a proper diagnosis of the condition and did not engage in a proper treatment plan, inappropriately did not respond when her clinical condition worsened, did not respond appropriately when she had negative, instead of certain medications helping her, she had a negative reaction to them, an adverse effect, and worsened, did not escalate her level of care when she began expressing concerning things, such as her own fear that she would kill herself or that she might do something very bad. So that's the gist of the malpractice case.
And I know we weren't going to use these, but as you were going through that, I really thought, what kind of set me back looking at this was the timeline of what she did and where she went through, and okay, severe insomnia, anxiety and depression, then medication changes, and the dates that went along with those, Kay, to me were like, wow, why wasn't the question at the right there, at what point did the clinical trajectory require a higher level of care? Like the question you just asked.
Yeah, that's exactly what the jury will get to determine, and there will be expert psychiatrists giving opinions on both sides of that, based upon the timeline, based upon what's noted in the medical records and whatnot. But I would say also this also paints a clear picture of someone who knew she was ill and was seeking help.
And so that leads me to my next question, because you look at this story and you think, wow, what she did, I mean, is awful. And it's like now she's suing for damages, her own damages, which I think surprised a lot of people. So
Yeah.
you're kind of talking about that right now, but how is that even possible that she could sue for damages for what she did?
Yes, and this is where a lot of people get off track because they'll only hear the surface of it and say, wait a second. I heard about some crazy lawsuit in Massachusetts where somebody killed her children and now she's trying to sue. She's trying to get money from somebody. And unfortunately, you know, um, these types of things sometimes lead to the passage of very bad laws by reactionary legislators that say, oh my God, we have this huge runaway lawsuit and runaway jury problem in the United States, and we've got to go pass a bunch of legislation to cut off everybody's rights because of things like this. But let's just look at what her claims are. After her husband, the father, filed the lawsuit, several months later, she got her own lawyer and she brought the lawsuit also in her own behalf. Part of the thing is that after she killed her own three children, she jumped from the second floor window of their home trying to kill herself. And she did not succeed in killing herself, but she sustained permanent spinal cord damage and paralysis. So her claim is basically that she was a victim of medical malpractice, that she was misdiagnosed, that she wasn't treated appropriately, and that it was foreseeable that she was going to do harm to herself or others. And that if she had been treated appropriately, this wouldn't have happened. And because she wasn't treated appropriately, and it was foreseeable that something like this could and did happen, that she sustained her own injuries for her own permanent disability, as well as having to live for the rest of her life, whether she lives it as a free woman or an incarcerated person. She has to live for the rest of her life with the knowledge of knowing that she killed her three children.
Yeah, I mean, either way, she's kind of in jail in that aspect.
Yeah.
When it comes to a jury, though, how would a jury actually go about deciding whether the psychiatric care that she received was negligent or not? Like, what does that process look like?
Well, and this gives me an opportunity. You get to a certain age, Kayla, you earn the right to just, go off on a few rants here or there, but we have the greatest system in the whole world for deciding disputes like this. And there's a lot to complain about, believe me, with what's going on in our world right now. But I have to say, the Seventh Amendment is really important because you get a jury of your peers and you get 12 people off the street to sit in a jury box, listen to the evidence, listen to what will be expert testimony on either side, and they get to decide. And I personally don't believe, when we hear people talking about, oh, such these silly lawsuits and these runaway juries, you're saying that 12 people who came in there with completely different life experiences and radically different opinions about controversial cases like this um, are not to be trusted to make good decisions. And in my experience, I've tried hundreds of jury trials. The jury doesn't always get it right, but it's very, very unusual that a jury would just lose their minds and award, hundreds of millions of dollars for no reason at all. So 12 people from Massachusetts will sit on this jury and they will listen to not only the factual evidence of what happened, what was documented in the medical charts, but they will listen to experts on both sides opine whether whether this was a violation of the applicable standard of care, meaning did the clinicians in this case fall below not best practices, but fall below what a reasonable and prudent practitioner would do or would not have done under the same or similar circumstances? And if so, was it reasonably foreseeable that this or something like this would happen? And if so, then was it preventable?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly kind of what I was hoping that you would explain is like, that is such a hard place to be in. I mean, to have to, but if you're presented with the facts and with the information, then it paints hopefully a clearer picture. But I don't envy those people at all being in the situation that they're going to be in, the jury, I mean. Based on what has been publicly reported, are there any facts that kind of stand out to you as an attorney that could be significant in this case?
Well, I haven't handled a case like this, but I've handled plenty of suicide cases. And one thing that the defense always seizes on is she denied being suicidal. She was specifically asked, are you thinking of hurting yourself or your children? And she denied it. So certainly the defense in this case is like, were we supposed to be mind readers? She said she wouldn't do it, and then she did it. But what I would say about that is that every clinician, whether it be a psychiatrist or a psychologist or whatever, dealing with suicidal patients, dealing with patients like this woman, knows that it's not just going through and checking a box. Okay, well, she says she wasn't going to do it. Any family who has dealt with a suicidal loved one knows you don't just check the box and say, they said they wouldn't. And I would argue, as if I was the plaintiff's lawyer in this case, that the constellation of the symptoms, the entire clinical picture leaned more towards she might do it than she said she wouldn't do it.
Yeah. And, the one question I have, and, I really want to keep catching up as this case continues with you
Yeah.
and getting more of your thoughts. But what if Patrick and Lindsay actually win this case? What does a potential recovery actually look like? And this is two separate questions, I guess, but how would it be different if this was actually in Texas and not Massachusetts?
Well, several things to unpack there. So the damages that would be recoverable in general terms would be Patrick's mental anguish and his grief for the loss of his three children. And those are what we call non-economic damages. Lindsay's claims are for her own mental anguish as a result of what she did while she was having a psychotic break. And those are also non-economic damages, but she's also asking for economic damages, which means her past medical expenses related to her spinal cord injury and her future medical expenses related to lifetime treatment for the spinal cord injury and her paralysis. In almost every state, not every state, but many states in the United States, there are caps in medical malpractice cases. Often there are caps on the non-economic damages. So in very, very general terms, in Massachusetts, the plaintiffs could go and get a multi-million-dollar jury verdict award in this case and keep it. In Texas, the plaintiffs could go get a multi-million-dollar award and not keep it because there are hard caps on non-economic damages. So, roughly speaking, the best the plaintiffs could ever do in Texas with a case like this, and I'm not talking about Lindsay's claim for her spinal cord damage right now. Let's set that aside. Let's only talk about for the deaths of the children, would be roughly $500,000 per child And that would be if the psychiatrist was sued and there was a viable claim against a hospital or a psychiatric hospital. Potentially, the max could be $750,000 per each child's death if there was a third healthcare institution involved, but that's also a very rare situation in Texas. So I would also say that in Texas, it may not be a viable claim to begin with because Texas has very harsh Texas Supreme Court opinions on foreseeability and causation in suicide cases. But even setting that aside, let's just say, by way of example, that the maximum that could be recovered in this case is $1.5 million. Well, this case would, in Texas, would probably be litigated for years and years, would go up on appeal on various legal issues in all likelihood, would cost, just in out-of-pocket expenses, hundreds of thousands of dollars and many, many years of work by a team of lawyers. So the case could be made that this would not be a viable case in Texas because of the economics of it. We literally just concluded a case that had been pending for 8 years. It went up to the Court of Appeals, and then it went up to the Texas Supreme Court, and then it came back down to the lower court, to the trial court, and we actually settled it on the eve of trial. But, and we won, and we obtained a favorable recovery for the client in the end. But, this is where, lawyers sometimes, like us, sometimes get a bad rap because they might say, well, how in the world, how arrogant of you to say a $1.5 million case wouldn't be worth your time and you couldn't make the economics of it work. But what I would point out is that, let's say on average, a median fee would be 40%. Yes, that is $600,000 in legal fees. And guess what? The lawyers that are defending the case are charging, their bills will be more than that. I assure you, because you've got a small army of lawyers working the case. Plus, let's say the lawyer has to come out of their own pocket a couple of $100,000, 250,000, 280, 300, depending. That's a lot of money to gamble and potentially lose on a case where it is filled with all kinds of sort of emotional things, such as how is a jury going to perceive this? It could go either way. How would the appellate courts rule on some of the legal issues? So, this sort of takes me back to pounding the drum, as I have a tendency to do, which is that we've got a real problem in Texas because our laws have just closed the courthouse doors to a lot of people who should be able to avail themselves of the legal system and let a jury decide. So in Massachusetts, this family will very likely get their day in court. And I'll be very interested to follow it all the way through, see how a jury perceives this. And, in the meantime, we'll continue to fight as many Texas cases as we can, and we'll continue fighting for reform so that more people have access to the courts in Texas like they do elsewhere.
Well, Kay, thank you so much for helping us understand what's really going on beneath the surface of this case. Now, for everybody watching, if this conversation has raised any questions for you about your own mental health and your own mental health care or the care of someone that you love, pay attention to that. And if you believe a loved one's mental health was mismanaged with devastating consequences, you know where the conversation starts.
Yeah.
And that's here at AdvoKAYte with Kay. So again, I want to thank you, Kay, and I want to thank everybody who's watched. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you have any comments, you can always leave them below. But Kay, we're going to be checking in with you again on this case, I'm sure, and talking more about how this, I mean, there's still so many questions that I have. So
Yeah, absolutely. And our heart goes out to the family in Massachusetts, and to anyone else who's struggling with postpartum depression or any other kind of mental health crisis. So
I love it. All right. Well,
thank
thank you,
you.
Kay.
You bet.